Hello, and welcome to a brand new day of free-to-play here on Magic the Gathering Arena. Get the dish on the latest with me, Lord Rumfish. I just wanted to do a quick video today talking about a concept I call card velocity. So, card velocity, for me, has its roots in the same kind of definition that the velocity of money has when you talk to an economist. Now, bear with me. One of the ways you can measure how healthy an economy is by how many times money changes hands. Not how much is made, not how much is profited, but just the number of times that, like a given dollar bill or a quarter or, the digital equivalent actually changes hands in an economy. Because theoretically, the more velocity that money has, the more times it changes hands, the more goods are being exchanged, and the healthier overall that your economy is. Whereas if your money velocity is very low, then that means things are stagnant, they're not moving very much, and that's not as good. How does this apply to Magic? So, card velocity is similar to the concepts of card advantage and card selection. I'll give a very brief rundown on those if you're not familiar. Card advantage is any time that you are plus additional cards. It could be as simple as you play a spell that says draw 2 cards. Now you have one more card in your hand than when you first cast the spell. That's card advantage. Some people would also consider that getting a presence on the battlefield, like a creature, that also then draws you a card or destroys an opponent's permanent, something like that, could potentially count as card advantage. It doesn't technically give you more cards in hand, but cards in play are kind of counted as card advantage of a sort until they're removed. Card selection means that you're not getting ahead on cards, but you're able to choose the card that you want. Probably the most extreme example of this is a tutor card like Demonic Tutor. You start with one card in your hand, you cast Demonic Tutor, you go fetch up the card you want out of your library. At the end of that, you still just have the one card in your hand that replaced the Demonic Tutor. So, you're not up on cards yet, but you've gained an enormous amount of card selection by choosing whatever you wanted out of your entire library. Similarly, blue has like impulse draw effects, where you look at like the top 4 cards or the top 7 cards, what have you. You pick 1 or 2 cards that you wanted out of those top many cards. And those are examples of card selection. So card velocity is similar to card selection, but it's not exactly the same. Right? Because Demonic Tutor has enormous card selection and just kind of middling card velocity. Here to help us with our discussion is everyone's favorite card in Standard, Rafine, Scheming Seer. Good old Rafine from Streets of New Capenna has been with us for about 3 years now in Standard. Is going to rotate, but until then, we are stuck with her. So, part of what makes this card so good is the Connive X. And a big part of what makes that Connive really good is the card velocity. Now, it's true that you're also getting +1 counters, and if you somehow had a version of Rafine that only did the +1 counters of Connive without any of the cards, it'd still be a useful card, but it wouldn't be nearly as dangerous as Rafine is. So, Rafine is letting you see a bunch of cards. All these cards are moving through your hand. They're also moving into the graveyard if you have a use for them there. In the Rafine decks, there's usually like a couple of creatures like Dinnick, Pious Apprentice. That can be cast from the graveyard. It's not a strong focus of the Rafine deck. It's just another little synergy that plays well with tossing all this stuff in the graveyard. But the real benefit there is being able to pass these cards through your hand in order to get the cards that you want. You're shaping the game as you go by taking the best handful of cards on any given turn. You're not going up on cards by doing this, but you're just getting the card that you need the most in that moment. So sometimes you might get into a position where you don't want to play a land because you'd rather cycle it away with the Connive to try to hit the spell that you need in order to keep getting gas to finish out the game. So card velocity is, it's there with the idea of card selection, but as Demonic Tutor kind of illustrates, it doesn't tell the whole story. Demonic Tutor, it serves a different role. It's probably a stronger card, but, there are other cards like Diabolic Tutor that probably wouldn't be as strong of an example. This is letting you see a lot of cards, a lot of options, and then filling up your graveyard with lots of options. Whether you're in limited or constructed, card velocity does a lot to help smooth out the game for you. It's difficult to always play optimally. Sometimes, you could start to search for a card in your library and you realize you're not sure what you're searching for yet. So it might take you a while to look, and this is especially true in games of like Commander, where if you don't know exactly what you need in your 100-card singleton deck, then you just kind of dig and dig and dig, and you're trying to go fast. The other players are waiting. Card velocity has a bit of an advantage there in that even if you're not sure exactly what you need, you might heuristically sort of find something that's good enough. You might be digging through the options of your deck, then you run across one, you say, that'll do. It might not be ideal, it might not be perfect, but good enough. You needed a land drop, you find a tap land. Well, it's better than nothing. You need a removal spell, it takes all your mana for the turn. Well, at least it got the job done. Card velocity is incredibly helpful, especially in limited. But as Rafine proves in constructed, it's incredibly useful there as well. In fact, if we go over to Rafine's Tower here for a second, cards that have additional velocity on them, like cycling, this is a way you can think of it. This is card selection, it's card velocity. It's not card advantage. Unless you're doubling the triggered ability on cycling, then you're just getting one card for one card. But it's letting you see more cards. And even at the price of 3 mana a pop, people still like them, people still use them. In the case of the lands, it's because they have a very low opportunity cost. You need a mana base for your deck anyway, so including something that has some other effect on it like this is pretty easy to include in your deck. But the card velocity of stuff like this really ties the room together with things like constructed decks. It can help take a deck idea that's okay in a vacuum but not very consistent, and it can ratchet up the consistency of the deck to the point that it's now formidable enough for, real constructed play. And for limited, let's slide over to Rafine's Informant here. There are a bunch of little, 2-mana creatures and artifact creatures and stuff where you can rummage, right? Discard a card to draw a card, or you can loot. You draw the card first and then you discard. Connive, in this case. You draw, then discard, and this can get a +1 counter potentially. These smooth out the game. It can help you find land if you need land. It can help you find spells if you need spells. Or it can just dig you to cards that are more relevant. Even if you have a good mix of lands and spells, sometimes you just get a little bit more quality this way. And even if all the cards in your hand are as good as possible, you still might draw a less useful card off the top and decide it is the least useful one in your hand and get rid of it, and you've still gained an advantage. Now you're not going to draw that card next turn. Now that card is available in your graveyard if you want to use it. Card velocity just does a lot to smooth out the game and make everything a much easier experience for you. So getting little effects like this in limited games are crucial to like hitting your land drops and smoothing out your mana. They're also pretty crucial and constructed for the same reason. Okay, so what about mill? You might be thinking that anything that moves cards for you counts in this case. That's only true with things that are essentially random, like mill, if you've built your deck to take advantage of them. If you have literally no way to interact with your graveyard, then mills are technically no advantage to you. And they could be an advantage for your opponent if they have, you know, an artifact that eats cards out of your graveyard and then they can crew it up later and turn it into a vehicle. Or they can reanimate a creature out of your graveyard and steal it from you. Essentially, random things like milling don't really count towards your card velocity unless you've planned ahead. If you're in a draft, that means taking things that work well with the graveyard, right? If you're in green-black in Outlaws of Thunder Junction draft, then you can be taking cards that reanimate creatures from the graveyard, or back for more, it pulls it back at instant speed and it fights something. If you have those cards available to you, then yeah, milling yourself is pretty good. That does increase your card velocity because you have access to them. If you haven't built the deck for it, if you don't have the interaction pieces, then that doesn't count. You're moving cards but for no purpose. Would be the same as if they were going into exile, if you can't interact with them. Another way you can get card velocity is kind of virtually, by instead of actually moving the card to a new game zone, you just shuffle it around in its current game zone. Scrying is a way you can do this. So, Warden of the Inner Sky is a good example. Every time you tap 3 things, get the counter on the Warden, you're also getting a scry 1. So you're able to put the top card of your library on the bottom if you want to. And it's it's a minor sort of digging of card velocity, but it's still a card that you saw, that you would have had access to, and you can say, nah, I'd rather have a different one. Which is, not quite as good as drawing it and discarding it, because it's not in your graveyard to use, but it's still similar. It's still churning through your deck in a sense. So, this is another way you can do it. White's pretty good at cantripping. Right, like drawing a card or finding, like a little creature that costs 3 mana or less, or fetching up a plains. Those are all ways that White's pretty good at card velocity. Blue, of course, has some of the most powerful card draw, card selection, and card velocity among any of the colors of Magic. Ledger Shredder here is seeing play in the Eternal formats, like Vintage and Legacy. So, and again, it doesn't get you up on cards technically. It's getting larger, which is, a game-ending threat unto itself, but you're also getting the advantage of, shaping your hand into the perfect grip of cards that you need for whatever's going on in the game at that moment. So just seeing those cards, however briefly, and being able to choose between them, and possibly getting benefits out of your graveyard, all of that has to do with benefits of card velocity. And then blue can even capitalize on this by, having creatures that have power equal to the number of cards you've drawn this turn, stuff like that. Aristocrats decks that are black-based often are very, very good at this kind of card velocity, kind of churning through the deck. When you cast Corrupted Conviction, you're using this spell, and you're also using a creature in play to get 2 cards. Now, if that creature in play was represented by a card, then technically you've gone 2 for 2 and you're neutral. But Aristocrats decks have ways to break the synergy. Maybe that creature, has a benefit when it dies. Maybe it leaves a creature token behind. Maybe it gains you life. Maybe it surveils for you. There's a lot of things that could happen. But beyond just breaking the symmetry of it, trading 2 cards for 2 cards is also, a good, cheap method of card velocity. So you can end up seeing a lot of cards in a deck like that, or Rakdos Anvil. Rakdos Anvil has a great mix of card advantage and card velocity happening, where it uses the little red artifacts that'll exile a card and you can play it until end of turn. And if you're able to do that, then you can eke out an advantage. It lets you see a lot of cards as you're playing the deck. Some of those you could call straight card advantage, some of them you'd call velocity, because you're just moving through them. But either way, it's part of what makes those decks good, is that you keep churning, you keep digging and moving through the deck. Things never come to a standstill. You almost never get into top deck mode. You are much more likely to deck yourself and mill out, rather than have the everything grind to a halt and stop. Experimental Synthesizer is the card I was thinking of for the Anvil decks. So red is great at this kind of effect now, where it makes you use it or lose it. Some of them are until end of the current turn, like this one. Those are the hardest to use. Then there are some that last until the end of the next turn. Red's also good at rummaging, where it discards cards in order to draw new cards. Red is pretty fantastic at this point in time at card velocity in particular. It's not bad at card advantage. You have to kind of tease it out of red. It's not quite as easy to just get straight card advantage as blue. But, as long as you can keep playing those exiled cards, you can keep, maybe discarding when your hand is empty to draw, 3 new cards, stuff like that. Then yeah, red can kind of churn forever. As long as you build your deck accordingly, it's very good at that now. Green is very good at interacting with the graveyard these days. So, I did say mill is essentially random, but as long as you're interacting with your graveyard, then mill can be beneficial. So, Smuggler's Surprise can get 2 cards out of a mill up front. If you have other cards in your deck that also interact with the graveyard, you can count that towards your your card churn, your card velocity as well. Green can draw cards. Every color in Magic has its ways that it can do it. Up the Beanstalk is a good example of a way that you can initially just kind of replace a few cards, but as the game keeps going, if you play something that's 5 mana or greater that got you card advantage anyway because of what that card was doing, or that card was at least replacing itself, like cantripping, then Up the Beanstalk turns it up into card advantage. Or the second copy of Up the Beanstalk starts turning it into card advantage. But the first copy mostly is just giving you velocity, and that velocity is good enough. Another way green achieves card velocity is interacting with land. Sometimes it just does it one land at a time, sometimes it becomes, proper card advantage, like with Invasion of Zendikar. But these kinds of cards, whether they're ramping you or putting the lands into your hand or whatnot, these also count as velocity, whether it's card advantage or not. You are moving through the deck. You're moving through the lands of the deck, and that's, there is an aspect where you're thinning out the lands and making them less likely to be drawn as the game goes on. That's maybe a minor aspect of the game, but at the same time, you're also making it more likely that if you have non-basic lands in your deck, you're more likely to draw those, and those might be more valuable than just top-decking a forest as well. There are a lot of little benefits to card velocity, even when it's just as simple as pulling a basic forest up out of your deck. Card velocity is something that any deck can get access to. Candy Trail is a great example. This card is probably like on the cusp of playability for Constructed. I do use it in a couple of slower decks that are more controlling. The life gain is nice, but making sure that you're finding your next land drop or digging your way to the next sweeper that you need, those are very handy. And leaving the Candy Trail in play, up until the end of the opponent's turn when you're ready to use it, that's a card that's not in your hand, right? That if the opponent plays like a discard effect, then they can't hit that card because it's not in your hand. They would have to mill it off the top of your library. Candy Trail's like a great example of a card velocity card. The scry is not card advantage, replacing itself is not card advantage, but all of that velocity and the life gain helps you to push yourself towards the late game. You're able to move into the mid game from the early game and set it up so that you can survive to reach the late game with a card like Candy Trail. That's most of what I had to say about card velocity today. I hope I have been of some value to you. If you'd like to join the conversation, sound off in the comments below. Like and subscribe. Please check out my other videos on the channel. I've made an entire set of Magic cards named Wastes of Veldmar. If you haven't checked it out, I've got the videos up on the channel. Before too long here, I might start doing some story pieces where I talk about the story of Wastes of Veldmar. And, I'll be around making standard decks and whatnot. So, until then, never stop honing your critical thinking and empathy.